This week's hike was up a trail I've been up a couple of other times. It's a Kings Peak trail. But in the past, I've always been turned back by snow at about a third of the way up. So this being the driest month of the year, it should be able to get a lot further. It starts out near the Elk River on the way to Gold River in Strathcona Park. Starts out nice moderate trail. It's pretty easy going. I started out at the lower trail, though you can park a lot closer up under these power lines. And this is the one and only bridge that's on the trail, quite early on and way up. That milky color that the creeks have here are the results of the water coming down out of the glaciers from up around Kings Peak. It's actually ground rock, fine dust that's hanging in the water. But after about half an hour of hiking, it starts getting a lot steeper. The trail starts to gain altitude quite quickly. Plenty of switchbacks in the beginning. Then it starts getting especially steep. There's a couple of scrambles early on the trail. Starting out over these root-filled cracks. Gets you over the first little cliffs on the trail. But that's quickly followed by a couple of rock scrambles that are actually considerably steeper than the camera actually shows here. There's a couple of these scrambles close to one another. Here's that scramble from the point of view of my chest camera. Well, there's plenty of handholds and little niches to put your feet into. And then eventually the trail continues on till it joins up some of the larger streams coming down from the upper parts of the mountain. Which makes for some very nice looking waterfalls. These waterfalls all along this particular part of the trail act as air conditioning. Actually cools off the air quite a bit, especially on a hot summer day like today. There's a snapshot looking up the trail, which is one of the rare places where it actually leaves the forest. Follows a stream bed for a short distance. And then in no time at all, you're back into the bushwhacking. It's quite overgrown in places. And then you start getting into the steeper sections, which gets pretty severely steep in a lot of places. Several sections come out next to the creek and follow the creek bed up. Which gets quite steep because you're actually right beside a waterfall in most cases. So you can figure on having to climb pretty steep terrain to stay up with the level of the creek. Luckily somebody has left some ropes tied in at a few places on the trail, which is very helpful. Makes for a great aid for getting up the steep sections. But from here on up, it's just continual climbing. Some sections have plenty of footholds, but in some places it was just loose rock on the sides of the hills next to the creek. But after a little more than 3 hours of this kind of climbing, I finally decided I'd gone far enough for the day. So I still had the effort of getting down all that steep terrain. So to actually achieve the summit of King's Peak, it's usually best to camp out overnight and take 2 days to do the climb. So because I was just day hiking, I was expecting to turn around at some point. So this seemed about as good a place as any. And at which point I started 3 hours of descent to get back down. Unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of King's Peak itself. Somehow I missed that with all the struggle to get up. Here I got back down to where the ropes are. They're especially helpful on the way down. It's quite easy to have your feet go out from under you on that loose gravel. Lots of odd bits of rope people have voluntarily left behind. There's one or two places where the creek came down close to the river. And it was easy to lose track of where the trail actually went. So a couple of times I ended up off trail and had to do a little bit of bushwhacking to get back up onto the trail. And of course I had to down climb these rock scrambles once again. Going down can always be a bit more awkward. I like to be able to face outward on the way down so you can see where your footing is. But if it gets too steep, I'd much rather have my toes gripping the rock rather than my heels. So I always find myself switching back and forth from facing down and facing up. A number of times I've done this, I'm always quite surprised that nobody's placed a good chunk of rope down this piece. But it's not too hard to find your footing, mostly. And eventually I got back down onto the easier terrain, back into the switchbacks, following smaller creeks. There's still a few very large trees to be had on this hillside. Some of the few giants that haven't been logged off in the past. Finally, I got down to the lower sections just before the parking lot where I stopped and had a bite to eat. So it was starting to get around noon already. Until finally on my way back to the parking lot. So 6 hours with about 1,100 meters of climbing and descent, of course. And actually kept an outtake from my filming. Oops.